Welcome to this week's video. This week's video we're doing a video about the Nissan Leaf Gen 1 on 5 pros and 5 cons about the actual electric car, the Nissan Leaf. Now I've obviously got a Renault Zoe that I do videos on every single week and other electric car news, and if you are interested in stuff like this, don't forget to click subscribe down the bottom. So let's get straight into it. Now first of all, one of the cons that I find with the Nissan Leaf is unlike the Renault Zoe where you have the preheat option on the key, you don't get that with the Nissan Leaf. You do get it with the EMV 200, but on the Nissan Leaf the only two ways of preheating the car are setting it on the dash similar to the Zoe, which is fine, that's great, or via the app, which is also similar to the Zoe. But the Zoe, you've also got the option of just pressing a button on the key and the heats come on, the lights come on, you know, basically it starts heating the car. Now the problem with stuff like Nissan Leafs, which are extremely popular around the world, the servers get absolutely overloaded in the morning when everyone wants to preheat the car, and obviously the same can also happen to the Renault Zoe's app, but the Renault Zoe has the override key button, which just heats it, and the Leaf doesn't have that, and that's a big downfall. Now number 2 is extremely subjective, and that is, I personally think it's as ugly as sin. Compared to cars like the Renault Zoe, I think it's just too wacky, it's too ugly. The Gen 2 I've done reviews on before, top right, have a look at them. Now I like the Gen 2, I think that's quite nice. But this is just ugly. Every angle, front, back, side, it's just ugly. Even the interior. Ugh. And that's where number 3 leads me on to the interior. It's the dash. There's too much. There's too much going on everywhere. There's 2 dashes. Why? Why not just have a nice little heads-up display? Why have 2 dashes? I don't get it. It's just very, very, very confusing. There's lots going on. There's lots of buttons everywhere. There's buttons all over the steering wheel. There's buttons all over the heating controls. There's just too much. There's too many buttons. I do not want this many buttons, Nissan. Sort it out. Point number 4, there's no thermal management system on the 22, 30 and 40 kilowatt battery on the Nissan Leaf. Now this seems absolutely preposterous. Why on earth would you not fit a thermal management system on the Leaf? Now before people get upset, yes, the Leaf does have a BMS system that has some temperature management system built into it that basically stops the battery from getting too hot. Now on the 40, that results in the charge rate slowing down rapidly. Now the charge rate doesn't really affect the 22 and 30, but what it will do is long term, and I mean very long term, it will affect the overall state of health of the battery, because when the battery is rapid charged, it gets hot very quick. If you're driving on a motorway just before, very quick, and then you're obviously rapid charging very quick, the battery's at a very, 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 very high state of temperature. Where on the Renault Zoe, for example, the battery has a full battery thermal management system with the air conditioning fans basically blowing cold air over the battery. The Nissan is just basically cooled by the outer air that's near the battery. So there's no thermal management system on the Leaf, and that is a really big negative point, especially if you've got a 40 Leaf. But on the 22 and obviously on the 30, it doesn't really affect the charge speeds, but it will long term affect the overall health of the battery. But don't let this put you off buying a Nissan Leaf because of battery health. Electric cars have proven, all electric cars have proven that batteries do last and are doing a lot better than people ever thought they'd do in an electric car. But no thermal management system battery won't survive well as a Renault Zoe battery, which is thermally managed, and that's just obvious. Ooh, better turn that off, it's draining my range. Yes, in the Nissan Leaf, the heater drains the range like mad, and I mean really drains it. Now it's a lot better in the newer generation UK built Nissan Leafs, but in the older ones it was even worse. It really drained the battery. But even in the newer one, it still drains the battery quite a lot, and that's quite annoying. Obviously in the winter you want the heating on, you're cold, but then also you're suffering in massive range losses on the heater. I mean it really does. You noticeably see the range counter go down quite dramatically with the heating on, which needs to be improved. There is ways of doing it, and we'll move on to that on the pros. Now, Pro 1, the heater works brilliantly. It's really warm, it's really hot. Compared to the Renault Zoe, this is absolutely brilliant. It's like having a diesel engine or a diesel heater in the car. Now it's really hot. Now the reason is, I think it's got a convection heater and a heat pump at the same time. I think the Gen 1 was just a convection heater, which is why it drained the battery so much, where the new one has that and a heat pump. But compared to the Renault Zoe, which is just purely heat pump, the Renault Zoe gets hot. It gets hot, it doesn't get warm. This gets warm, and I mean really warm, really toasty, and that's why it suffers with the range, but at the same time it gets hot. So it depends what you prefer. Would you rather suffer range, or would you rather be a bit toasty? And that's there's a bit of a compromise there. I mean, you can do what I did on a recent long journey in this, and that is every now and again turn the heater on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, and it's a little bit annoying, but that is one way that you can prevent range. And when you're trying to maximise the distance out of one charge, the best way of doing it is just basically turn the heater off. Number 2, my favourite thing the Nissan Leaf does, the fact that CHAdeMO unlocks the cable automatically. Yes, you've heard me right. When the charge has stopped by the car or the charger, the CHAdeMO charger unlocks itself, meaning that if another car pulls up, it can take the CHAdeMO out of your car because you've stopped charging and plug it into their car. And the best thing about the Nissan Leaf, there's a feature to stop the charge at 80%, because as a lot of people know, on rapid chargers, when you get 80%, you've had pretty much your max fill of what it's going to take at full kilowatt hours. So if you're not back in time for the charge to finish, you can have the car automatically stop at 80%, and the person can unlock the cable and plug their car in. That, my friends, is one of the best parts about CHAdeMO over Type 2 and CCS. The small disadvantage on this is obviously someone could hit the emergency stop button and basically unplug your charge. However, let's hope that people aren't that naughty and don't do that, and in which case that is a brilliant feature on the Nissan Leaf. Oh, that's a good bang. That's the other thing about Nissan, the build quality is a lot higher. Now, I've driven this and my dad's driven this as well. He prefers the drive of the Nissan. He says it's much more planted, it's a much more solid drive, and the car feels much better built than the Renault Zoe. And he loves the Zoe. Now, I've driven it too. The drive's fantastic. I do like the way it drives. I do prefer the Zoe over the drive. It's just a little bit sportier and a bit sort of, you can really whack it in the corners. But the build quality on this is definitely better than the Renault Zoe, 100%. The way it's put together, the reliability standards behind it, it is a lot better than the Zoe. You can't deny that. Oh, sorry about that. It's just so big in here. And that is the next point. It's a very spacious car. It's huge. It's bigger than the Zoe. The Zoe is a big car. The Zoe's a bit of a TARDIS, but this is definitely bigger. There's more legroom in the back. There's lots of room in the front. Is also a massive boot, which is why there's so many Leaf taxis about and you don't see any Renault Zoe taxis, and that is because the Leaf is a bit of more of a spacious car. You can fit more luggage in the back, people in the back of the car are more spacious, there's just a bit more room in it, it's a bit more roomy, and that is a massive plus point. If you're wanting a bigger, more spacious car inside, the Leaf is bigger. That is by no means saying that the Zoe is small. There's, like I said, the Zoe is a little bit of a TARDIS, but there's no denying that the Leaf is a lot more spacious inside. And last but not least, my favourite feature on the Nissan Leaf is the charge port lights itself up and doesn't blind you. It's got a nice little light underneath that when you open it up, and it's nicely dispersed so you can see both the CHAdeMO and obviously the Type 1 plug. Obviously the newer Nissan Leafs, the Gen 2 2018 Nissan Leaf, that has a lit up charge port exactly the same, but obviously it has a Type 2 socket instead of the Type 1. But lovely little feature off Nissan. Thanks very much for watching this week's video. Don't forget to click subscribe. Don't forget to check out my other videos and consider becoming a patron. Thanks very much, and I'll see you again next week. Goodbye.